And it's my great pleasure to introduce our host for tonight, Saima Mohsin, who's a journalist and TV presenter. She has covered 28 countries as an international correspondent with a variety of stories, which include the tragic shooting down over Ukraine of flight MH17. She has also hosted panels and UN events with a focus on race and climate change. Saima was injured while on assignment for CNN, working in Jerusalem, and spent the last 3 years recovering. And we are really pleased that she's now back, returns to journalism, and you can see her, you can catch her on Sky News and making programs for ITV as well. Saima, very welcome.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's really nice to see so many people here to listen to Michael Bociurkiw, because he's brilliant at telling stories, he's brilliant at understanding and analysing what is happening in our world. I'll start by telling you a little bit about Michael and how we came to work together over the years, and then go on to tell you about his book too. So Michael's a writer, he's a public speaker, he's a global affairs analyst, he's very active on Twitter, look out for him there, and he's a two-time TEDx speaker, which I didn't know actually, Michael, and his geopolitical commentary is regularly featured on CNN Opinion, but you'll also see him, as you saw in that video, speaking on CNN, on Al Jazeera, on BBC World, giving his analysis. I've interviewed him many times, and as I said, I always find him engaging and really helps me and our viewers understand what's really going on around us. I first met Michael in Pakistan when he was the spokesperson for UNICEF, and he had approached me. I had gone to Pakistan to help launch their first English news channel, and I was hosting their flagship news analysis program. First woman to do it, by the way. And he approached me to support and talk about the UNICEF and WHO's polio campaign in Pakistan. And what struck me about Michael was not that he was getting the job done, but also how much he cared about getting the job done. And I think that talks to how and why Michael has been involved and helped behind the scenes along so many humanitarian crises. He went on to work for World Health Organization, the Pan American Health Organization, and later, a number of years later, he became the spokesperson for the OSCE, which is the Organization for Security and Cooperation for Europe, in Europe. That was part of the special monitoring mission in Ukraine. And of course, lo and behold, as Alessia mentioned, one fine day, both of us had a news alert that a plane had come down over Ukraine, and it happened to be a Malaysian Airlines plane. Now, Michael and I also have a connection of having worked in Malaysia too, and I had worked on the missing plane, MH370, for a number of years and followed it closely, so CNN sent me to Amsterdam where the plane had taken off. Michael and I were speaking, and next thing I know, Michael is part of the very first international team to monitor and investigate the crash site. So he's always at the centre of what's going on. Maybe I need to investigate that. He's also the founder and co-host of a podcast called Global Impact. That's well worth listening into, tuning in. He interviews extraordinary people. Again, I think a testament both to Michael's character and Michael's knowledge of what's happening around the world, that he has so many brilliant people on this. And A Digital Pandemic is his first book, and recently published also as an audiobook in his dulcet tones, not mine. I have one more page to go, don't worry. I don't have as many pages as the Prime Minister, so I won't take too long shuffling, and I can confirm I have not been to Peppa Pig World. So let me tell you about Digital Pandemic. I will actually have to refer to my notes, so I don't want to get this wrong. So Digital Pandemic is about, of course, what's happened in COVID-19, a pandemic in the digital world, and it's about how tech went from bad to good. In early 2020, Michael was on a writing sabbatical. He was touring Spain when his phone, once again as it often does, started receiving texts from Asia about this curious, mysterious disease sickening hundreds, at the time, just hundreds, of people in China's Hubei province. Little did he know that, of course, it would quickly morph into the deadliest pandemic in modern history. So his early reporting and commentary on what would become known as the coronavirus pandemic has now been collated in this first real-time report on COVID-19, the crisis, and taken from the nexus of geopolitics, the economy, health, society, social media, and of course technology, which we've all had to be inextricably linked to, haven't we? So tonight, Michael's going to talk us through the parallels of what he found through the research of his book, and I think it was pretty immediately striking, of the parallels of the handling of Chernobyl and COVID-19. But first, he'll give us his analysis of the current crisis. If any of you are following in the news, there's a lot going on the Ukraine and Belarus borders. So Michael will first start with that. So I'll hand you over without further ado to my friend, colleague, global analyst, Michael Bociurkiw. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, before I leave you and hand you over, a couple of bits of housekeeping. Please do keep your mobile phones on silent. If you have any breaking news to attend to, just if you don't mind leaving the room to take your phone calls. And at the end, there will be a Q&A session. I'm not going to get to interrogate him, you will. So I will come to you. If you put your hands up when Michael finishes speaking, I will come to you for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Saima, and our honored audience. I gotta say, usually for a Canadian to fill a room in London, you have to come with very bright socks, a full head of hair, and usually a surname like Trudeau. So I'm very honored all of you came here. And I'd also like to, of course, thank the organizers, the Ukrainian Institute of London under the amazing leadership of Dr. Alessia Kremenchuk. Real pleasure and seamless to work with her. And Saima, of course, thank you for hosting tonight, for taking time out of your busy schedule. And to me, you're not only an outstanding journalist and presenter, but also a real friend of Ukraine, who often, as with MH17, was there to tell the truth and get it out. And in this point of time in the world, it's very difficult to do sometimes. So I'll have to recognize some other people near the end, and I do promise to leave some time for the Q&A, for the interrogation. But yeah, first let's deal with the breaking news of the day. As I just told one of the diplomats here, and thank you all of you from the Diplomatic Corps for coming tonight, is that I feel a gut feeling that we're not in a good place right now when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia border. The alarm bells should be ringing very, very loudly in all Western capitals, and I don't feel they aren't at the moment, and that's why a couple of days ago, yesterday actually, on CNN, we did the live from here. I told them really straight what I thought about what's going on. And you know, I honestly feel that there shouldn't be any piece of territory elsewhere in the world that should be seen as strategically important as Ukraine right now, especially given where it stands, the buffer between Russia and the rest of Europe and the West, but also with upwards of 100,000 Russian troops amassed on its border, along with tons and tons of very sophisticated weaponry. And I said it very bluntly on CNN the other day that I think President Putin is a very, very dangerous man at the best of times, and that, again, I'm going on gut feeling, is that he's poised to do another land grab. I doubt that his ambitions will extend all the way to the Dnipro River, which would include Kiev, but I do think he's positioning himself to fortify the combatants who currently occupy Donetsk and Luhansk. And there also could be plans afoot to finally create that land bridge with Crimea, with the legally annexed Crimea, because it's a very difficult piece of territory to service with just that one land bridge, that hardwired bridge. I also have a feeling that Putin is very anxious right now with some changes in the battlefield, really crucial ones. So what's happening right now is the Ukrainians have acquired very sophisticated armed drones from Turkey, and this has given them some pretty impressive achievements on the battlefield. It's called the Bayraktar T2B drones, and they've been destroying things like Russian-made howitzers, for example, in combatant-controlled areas. Now, it's very curious because, of course, President Putin has denied any Russian involvement or presence in Donetsk, but yet these guys have a lot of sophisticated weaponry. And I see my friend Neve here, also with the former OSCE Special Monitoring Mission. When we were there, we were allowed access to the occupied territories, and I think we had a relatively easy time, although we had two kidnappings right before I made 17 of our colleagues. But what happens right now is really worrisome in the sense that OSCE monitors are being blocked, they're being attacked, their drones are being destroyed. A lot of their surveillance equipment is being destroyed, and why would you do that unless you're planning something quite big? The other interesting thing about these drones is that you may recall that they gave the Azerbaijani side quite the advantage in the recent Nagorno-Karabakh conflict with Armenia. And I worry about this scenario too, because when we go back to 2014, when we were first there in the run-up to the MH17 shoot-down, is Ukraine had pretty good air superiority, and this really freaked out the combatants. So what did they do is they picked up the phone and called Moscow and said, we need help right away. What did they do? They delivered a sophisticated Buk missile launch system, and that tragically, almost as soon as it arrived, shot down MH17, claiming the lives of 298 innocent souls, which adds to the terrible death toll that we see right now in eastern Ukraine. So as I said, alarm bells should be ringing in many Western capitals, and I think that what needs to be shown to President Putin is unity in the West. As I document in the book, there was very little unity, coordinated action shown among allies in the fight for COVID-19 against the pandemic. It was pretty disgusting in some instances of the lack of cooperation. But that's what we need right now, and I think a very, very firm articulation of the penalty of making another land grab. I think at the end of the day, what Russia would really fear right now is very, very tough financial sanctions. I'm talking about going all the way in terms of removing them, at least temporarily, from the SWIFT payment system. That would be very painful. But we don't know how far the West is willing to go in that regard right now. Has to be said, Putin is a master at creating false pretexts for invasions. What has been happening in the past 2 or 3 years is hundreds of thousands of Russian passports have been issued to residents of the Donbass. And this may convince Putin to say that, well, he now has grounds to invade because these people who have Russian passports are vulnerable and we have to protect them. In fact, Russia's TASS has said that almost 600,000 Russian passports have been handed out in Donbass since April of 2019. And even President Zelensky has said that he believes that this is a pretext for more of a land grab. A good question was raised in the past few days by Tobias Elwood. The name is recognizable, I think, to some of you, chair of the UK Defence Select Committee. He said, I'm quote, "Is this going to be the moment where we are going to defend Ukraine's sovereignty? Or are we going to step back and allow Russia to advance once again, as it did in Crimea, as it did in Georgia as well?" So I do believe that Russia is banking on the West's maintaining an ambiguous stance, a gray line, and where its red lines actually are. And this is a very, very dangerous stance to maintain at the moment. The key aspect of Russia's playbook, which, by the way, has some similarities with China's playbook, is to continuously test the West, but also to provoke and even strike when the West is distracted, as we are right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, with the resurgence, with the Delta and other strains. It would be almost a perfect storm for Russia to make their move. But I'm hearing more and more, if you go to any security conference, I was recently at the Riga Security Conference, about talk of hybrid wars and how Russia is really gaining expertise and putting a lot of resources in it. Disinformation, misinformation, cyber attacks. Oftentimes it can influence the geopolitical stage without firing one shot. And I think that's where we're moving to as a world community of this type of hybrid warfare. And of course, he has his puppet in Minsk, President Lukashenko, who, as many of you know, has been waging a hybrid war with the rest of the EU. He's been using vulnerable migrants as weapons to cause trouble for the West, ostensibly in retaliation for sanctions. Things have eased somewhat, but I don't expect Lukashenko to go away anytime soon in terms of being a nuisance to the West. And many of you will recall, I think Saima and I were both on the air at the same time when Lukashenko brought down that Ryanair jet to seize a wanted dissident. And many people labeled him a skyjacker at the time. And it was kind of humorous. I think it was Politico who said when Lukashenko went to Moscow to meet with Putin, he said, skyjacker on his way to Moscow to meet with Putin. And I think one of the things that worries me in terms of unity in the West is that I was checking the other day of who's actually overflying Belarus, because remember the reaction to Ryanair, the Ryanair downing was that it had to be very firm and quick. So no Western airlines were flying over Belarus for quite some time. But I checked a few days ago, and now Turkish Airlines are flying over there. So I'm expecting to see more and more coming back to that airspace. And then finally, a quick word before I move on to the book is that I recently interviewed for Global Impact, our podcast and vodcast, Foreign Affairs Minister of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba. And we put it to him very straight, is we said, what's going on? Why is the West, or why is the EU seeming to slow motion your ascendancy into the EU? Is there a fear in Brussels and other capitals that giving Ukraine full membership into the EU will provoke the Kremlin? And he said, yep, you're exactly right. So that puts a very sad state of affairs out there on the table. And of course, if the NATO membership ever happens, I don't think it will. I think it'll be kind of a hybrid membership that will also provoke President Putin very harshly. One last thing. At the moment, the US, which is normally the strongest backer of Ukraine, doesn't have many crucial diplomatic boots on the ground at the moment. Many ambassadorial posts, including Kiev, are empty. There's no ambassador there. About 50 nominees are being blocked right now on the floor of the US Senate by one man, Senator Ted Cruz, who doesn't get a very nice shout out in my book as well on how he acted during the pandemic. So, on that point, it's very different. I know from my work with the OSCE, having an ambassador as compared to a chargé, with all due respect to chargés, but when it comes to speaking to a Lukashenko or someone like that, it makes a big, big difference if you're an ambassador. And don't forget, that was one of the recommendations out of the 9/11 Commission, is that it's really important to have ambassadors on the ground to speak to both our allies and our enemies, because they can make things happen. So the thesis in the book, Digital Pandemic, that I wanted to talk about tonight is the stark parallels between the handling of the pandemic, comparing the Chinese communist regime under Xi Jinping and also the Chernobyl nuclear disaster of 1986, and how that was handled by the then Soviet communist regime. And in fact, the independent, here in the UK, the Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response, led by two former heads of governments and a host of international experts, including former UK Foreign Secretary David Miliband, said, COVID-19 is the 21st century's Chernobyl moment. So, a quick footnote about the book is that I approached this topic not as a scholar, my father was one, but more as a journalist, as a reporter. It was kind of a real-time reportage, but using my experience of covering China and the SARS outbreak in Asia. As was mentioned, I'm a former staffer consultant working on preventable disease outbreak with UNICEF and WHO, and that was mostly with polio and measles. And from the very, very beginning, I was accredited by WHO to attend their biweekly press conferences. So I covered the pandemic very early, and then also CNN Opinion tasked me very early on to document breaking news events for COVID-19. But going to Chernobyl, so the year was 1986, and I was working as a very, very junior reporter in Jersey City, New Jersey, across the river from Manhattan, with a newspaper called the Ukrainian Weekly. And there was a small team of us there, and that's when we first heard about serious trouble at the Chornobyl nuclear station north of Ukraine's capital, Kiev. Now, Chernobyl, of course, struck well before social media was with us. There was no Twitter, Facebook, anything like that. So as a small reporting team, we were very dependent on these crackling telephone lines to the Soviet Union. And we called up all of our sources, whoever we can, to get the story of what was happening behind the Iron Curtain. But at that early stage, the rumors sounded very, very bad. And no one had any idea in those cold April days that Chernobyl would later become the world's worst nuclear disaster and one of the biggest breaking news events of our careers. The trickling details coming out of Ukraine were indeed bad. An explosion and then a fire had apparently triggered the release of deadly radioactive energy into the heavens at a plant on the border of the Belarusian SSR and Ukraine. And how did the Kremlin react? Confused, with embarrassment, they set up a news blackout right away. But 2 days after the explosion happened, abnormally high levels of radiation were detected at a nuclear plant in Sweden, which was about 1,000 kilometers away. And then Soviet officials were forced to fess up about what actually happened. They were basically cornered on what happened. And in our newsroom, we had already received news of children in in Poland receiving iodine to combat the effects of radiation. Yet, confusingly, the May Day parade at that time was still going to go ahead, even as airborne radiation was very, very high. Time magazine reported at the time that the review stand at the May Day parade in Kharkiv was empty. A lot of people were out there, a lot of weaponry and so on, but there were no senior Soviet officials at the grandstand. So that told people at that time, they were very, very good at reading the tea leaves, that something was not normal here. But again, as a small newspaper with limited resources, we tried to find out what was happening, and we initially reported that about 15,000 people could already have been almost immediately killed by the accident. But decades later, about right now, it suggested that 300,000 people were ultimately impacted by the disaster, but no one, of course, will ever know for sure. And it was only until at the end of the Cold War that Soviet officials put the official death toll at 31. Years later, a friend of mine, Professor Serhiy Plukhay, from the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, he's written a very, very authoritative book on Chernobyl. He wrote that Chernobyl turned out at the end of the day to be the third most powerful nuclear reactor accident in the world. At that time, releasing the equivalent of 500 Hiroshima bombs. 500 Hiroshima bombs. It had the capacity to make not only Europe entirely uninhabitable, but the whole world. So we got away as a world community quite lightly, of course, with all due respect to those who were impacted, but it could have been a lot worse. And a quick footnote, I've been to Chernobyl twice. While it was still a restricted zone, I went for my newspaper at the time, the South China Morning Post. And then, recalling those tragic events, the former deputy director of the Chernobyl plant, Sergei Padoshin, said, "It is hard for the younger generation to imagine that we lived at a time when information was restricted. But we didn't have many truths, but the truth was a lie." And my friend your colleague from Sky News, Diana Magnay, said in her documentary about Chernobyl, it is hard to estimate how many the radiation has affected, how many lives, cancers, or radiation-related disease will have been cut short by this disaster. The feeling of loss and grievance of futures unfulfilled, they are as clear as ever. So going on to COVID-19, I got a real sense of deja vu, as you might imagine, not only because of how Chernobyl was handled, but also because of the SARS virus. But Mark Twain once said, history never repeats, but it often rhymes. And as I said, I was writing very much about this, the initial outbreak of COVID, forcing an opinion at the time, and a lot about the whistleblowers, especially Dr. Lee, who was the first whistleblower, and the citizen journalists who were at the beginning of that book trailer you saw. To me, they were some of the heroes of COVID-19. And Dr. Li Wenliang, he got into trouble very early because still in December of 2020, he messaged his colleagues on WeChat, his medical school colleagues, and said there's something really, really bad happening here. A SARS-like illness is appearing after he visited a local food market, and he started seeing patients at his hospital in Wuhan. He immediately came under heavy censorship pressure from China. They removed a lot of his posts. And then sadly, Dr. Li became a victim of the very same virus he was writing about, and he died. And up until the minute, almost, that he died, he, for example, gave an interview to CNN with that breathing mask on, his heavy breathing, telling everyone what is going on. It was his last chance to get the truth out. Of course, Xi Jinping and the comrades in Beijing didn't know how to react to this massive reaction to what Dr. Li did, because a lot of his posts were being reproduced on social media. So at the end of the day, they kind of called him a hero, and he did a good thing, but he's not with us anymore to tell us his story. But again, to many Chinese people, this was a real tipping point, given the manipulation and suppression of information in terms of what was allowed. And a lot of anger was expressed on online forums, and even officials and academics expressed grief and outrage at how Dr. Li was treated. So it seemed to me, and again I'm getting closer to the comparisons with how Chernobyl was handled, was there's a kind of nothing to see here attitude, and again eerily reminiscent of what the Soviet authorities handled. Listen to this, the Chinese officials in Wuhan decided at that early stage to go ahead with the annual Communist Party meetings and a huge Lunar New Year banquet for more than 10,000 families. Very similar to how Russian officials took the decision to go ahead with the May Day parade in 1986, as I talked about, knowing full well radiation levels were surging. To not do so, presumably, would have undermined the communist government position that everything was fine. Yet both these decisions were likely made knowing full well that the city of 11 million people was about to enter a hard lockdown, and that these gatherings could easily become super spreader events. Again, the Chinese government also delayed by about 2 weeks the visit of the World Health Organization investigative team. 2 weeks at the start of a pandemic is a very, very long time. You need to act immediately, and you need to act firmly. And of course, they were coming in to investigate the origins of the rumored new virus. The WHO team was sent in February 2020. Now, you'll never hear this from the WHO, but those experts who were allowed in to do their job said that had the Chinese authorities come clean on the scope of what was unfolding, it might have avoided a lot of damage, a lot of deaths. And it's really interesting to watch what is happening in China right now in regards to the WHO. Dr. Tedros, the Ethiopian-born Director General of WHO, was actually a pretty close friend of Xi Jinping. He made a very high-profile visit to China. But now he's becoming less and less featured in Chinese state media because he's becoming more critical of China. So it's very interesting to see this revisionism going on. As far back, I had to say a word or two about Taiwan. A lot of the West right now is, of course, legitimately worried about Chinese plans, mainland China's plans for Taiwan, about an invasion possibly, but it was the Taiwanese who are not full members of WHO because they're being blocked by Beijing, who rang the alarm bell very early about this mysterious virus that was circulating, a highly infectious cases they were picking up on the island, because there was a lot of cross-strait travel at the time between mainland China and Taiwan. But they were also met with silence in terms of their alarm bell ringing. And again, they're being blocked continuously for a seat at the table at the World Health Assembly by China. And it's really sad to see this happening, because when it comes to pandemic response, Taiwan, along with New Zealand, along with Singapore, pretty much set the gold standard in terms of fighting the pandemic. They did very, very well. They continue to do well. So we need to learn from people like that. So looking back over 2020, the parallels between the two communist catastrophes keep on piling up. But what ultimately made COVID-19 worse than Chernobyl was that humans are far, far now more interconnected, and of course radioactivity can't be easily spread by coughing. For instance, Chinese citizens had for years dominated the world's outbound travel market in terms of both numbers and money spent during their trips overseas. So that kind of made Chinese tourists the unwilling but perfect vectors for spreading the novel coronavirus. Yet, Beijing's delays and obfuscations resulted in the virus rocketing around the globe at lightning speed. Also, as I was kind of intimating, COVID reminded me again of Chernobyl, because it prompted a sense of deja vu in many of us. I remember working as a journalist in Southeast Asia. In 2003, the region looked on very helplessly as the SARS virus infected more than 8,000 people, eventually killing 774. But as SARS ravaged Asia's tiger economies, I also remember the Chinese Communist Party trying to cover up the news about the pandemic. They lied about it. I mean, they lied about it. You know, I asked myself, when news of COVID-19 started to emerge, will the Chinese Communist Party be playing the same trick this time with COVID-19? Indeed, even with the passing of almost 2 decades, they did the same thing. None of their obsessive and controlling actions since that time had changed my mind, at least, about what it might do in the event of another pandemic. If anything, the Chinese government has probably become much better at hiding the truth today. And my immediate feeling was that China would lead the world quickly into dark times. My feeling when it comes to President Xi Jinping, who, like President Putin, has aspirations to be president for life, is he's becoming kind of immune to Western threats, especially over America's willingness or stance to defend Taiwan should it be invaded, which they will sooner or later. Gotta say, while I'm very critical of China and some other big players in the COVID-19 pandemic, I should also say that there are a lot of Western countries that can't bathe themselves in glory. A lot of mistakes were made. There is very, very little pandemic response, very little stocking of crucial essential materials, masks, oxygens, ventilators, things like that. But very, very worryingly, a couple of things was that a lot of countries ignored the advice of the WHO, and a lot of them did not move quickly to do things like testing and tracing, and again, pre-positioning of materials. And even in Canada right now, we have a patchwork of policies and responses. We have, I think right now, at least 10 different apps to say that we're fully vaccinated, but oftentimes they don't work in other provinces as we travel across the country. So how are they going to work in other countries of the world? So I think we're wrapping up soon with time here. The Chinese Communist Party, at the end of the day, we're almost, about 2 years into the pandemic, have pretty good reason to toast themselves on a few things. I mean, after all, the pandemic offered China a chance to strengthen its ties with friendly nations or make new friends by shipping scarce protective gear to their struggling hospitals and well as life-saving vaccines. There was a lot of so-called vaccine diplomacy going on and even mask diplomacy. But China also turned its entire country into a huge laboratory so it could take the opportunity to go ahead, get ahead of its competitors and test everything from vaccines and stem cell technology to virtual health software on an unsuspecting population. Just like the Soviets tried to conceal Chernobyl, the Chinese Communist Party attempted to carry on with business as usual. They got rid of crucial evidence. They detained or imprisoned citizen journalists. They scrubbed social media. They silenced local officials. And they engaged in very, very vicious accusatory diplomacy whenever a foreign official dared to criticize Beijing. The kind of tactic of lumping blame on everyone else to avoid any awkward questions about what really happened was taken straight out of the Soviet playbook. And even, you may recall, in March 2020, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Linjiang even tried to blame the US military servicemen for spreading the virus. So at some point, the disinformation campaign became quite laughable. So it makes you wonder if Chernobyl happened at a time with today's computer technology, the Kremlin would have reacted just like the Chinese by arresting prominent opponents, throttling social media, and relying on pliant state media outlets to help suppress the truth. And again, increasingly, I find Russia and China following the same playbook, especially when it comes to flouting the rules of the international-based system, suppressing dissent, weaponizing technology, propping up murderous authoritarian regimes. It's quite a rap list. Again, about this growing cooperation between Beijing and Moscow, I'll cite a March 23rd, 2021 statement by China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson, who said, "The more unstable the world is, the more China and Russia need to advance our cooperation." And this is a real important little factoid I found out for you, is that Russia, during the entire pandemic, maintained very regular contacts with high-level contacts with China, and Russia was reportedly the most visited country by high-level Chinese delegations in 2020, despite the global pandemic, which I described as a year when diplomacy was crushed because a lot of diplomats, heads of state, did not travel at that time. Yet China and Russia were going ahead with their bilateral business. A bit of a word about technology and how China used it. It was their very technology Beijing had set up across the country before the pandemic to suppress dissent and lawbreakers. Surveillance cameras and monitoring software deep in the operating system of mobile phones, which helped the state manage its lockdown so effectively. China even used the low-tech method of state cadres or community watchers to snitch on anyone who might have been breaking the quarantine. But it was really their technology, their vast CCTV network that helped them control these lockdowns. And right now, I think the number of CCTV cameras in China is something like 10 times more than there are in the United States. And also, you may have heard that there's a social credit system that has been implemented that if you do things like litter or jaywalk or even engage in gossip, this will affect your social credit score in China in terms of travel, getting a bank loan, getting a job. So many people do ask me, why don't we hear much of a peep from Chinese citizens when they're being so oppressed or suppressed right now? And that's one of the reasons why the control is actually pretty complete. I think I'm going to wrap up a bit early. I was going to talk a little bit about vaccine diplomacy and how China has manipulated its relationships with that. But let it just be said that if you're a country, for example, like Ukraine, who didn't get early access to Western vaccines, then sometimes you have no choice but to go to China. So that's exactly, for example, what Ukraine did. And there's a very well-known list of rules that if you're going to be a friend of China and take billions of dollars of loans or take vaccines or anything like that, well, you have to follow the rule book. And that includes No criticism of its human rights record, not a peep about Taiwan, no blocking of motions on the floor of the UN General Assembly. And Ukraine found out its lesson very early on. Shortly after vaccines were beginning to be delivered from Beijing, the Chinese had noticed that, Ukraine's list is on a UN petition criticizing China's treatment of Muslim minority in China. And the Chinese were very blunt with the Ukrainians. They said, take your name off immediately, or that shipment on its way right now of vaccines is going to be stopped. And the Ukrainians took their name off of that petition, even though I know deep in their hearts they're very sympathetic of these people who are being persecuted. But they had no choice. And this is the way China plays. Expect more of it as they get more confident, as this works with vulnerable countries. That's the way they're going to operate. So thank you for that somewhat disjointed presentation, which has been somewhat affected by jet lag, but I hope I've come across, and much, much more in the book about many of these facts. So thank you.
Is this Chatham House rules?
Not really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's being recorded and then it'll be uploaded.
Okay. Do you want to fix the screen? Because the screen
Sure.
came off.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I was just checking something with Michael. So it's now over to you guys for questions. Just to be clear to you, this is being recorded, so we would like you to say your name, where you're from, when you ask a question. But if you don't want to, that's also fine. And just be mindful that this is being recorded and it will go on the Ukrainian Institute's YouTube channel, I think, right?
If you don't want to appear on any of the photos, just approach us
and let us know. So I was just checking if it was Chatham House rules, as in you can say what you like and Michael can say what he likes. Michael can say what he likes, but you might not want to. So, right, who's got a question for us? To the cameraman first.
So continuing the parallels with Chernobyl and COVID, the same historian you mentioned, Tony Blocky, in a different book about the collapse of the Soviet Empire, talks about Chernobyl as a moment where, especially Ukrainians, but the Soviet people generally kind of lost trust in the Soviet authorities, and then that did contribute but we don't know how much, but in a fairly big way in the eventual collapse, five years later, of the Soviet Union. Do you see any possibility, I mean, probably not in 5 years, you won't see the Chinese Communist Party collapsing, but do you see any parallels there in kind of Chinese citizens losing faith and trust in the Chinese Communist Party, and the potential kind of ticking time bomb perhaps for an eventual collapse?
Very good question. A couple points there is, what's happening right now is very interesting when you watch how Xi Jinping is treating various areas of the economy and of his country. For example, I think it was Deng Xiaoping who said to get rich is glorious. So of course a lot of people got very, very rich in China. I think they have among the most billionaires in the world. But yet a lot of these guys are being taken down, picked one by one and taken down. And you know, in China, if you're a member of the burgeoning middle class, you're probably not going to play the stock market that much, but you're probably going to invest in property. And that could be the ticking time bomb when that starts to implode, and in fact it is in various places. A lot of people losing all of their savings because they invested in these companies that do property. But many Chinese citizens see that as the only way to get ahead. And as soon as that bubble bursts, you can see a lot of problems. But having said that, their network of surveillance is second to none. And everyone knows about these terrible detention camps, what happens to you when you do something wrong. When it comes to Ukraine and Chernobyl, even though it's way back in 1986, I think the memories are very fresh. People remembered that they were lied to. And sadly, I think that is a very, very big reason why the trust of Ukrainian people is very, very low in their government, including when it comes to vaccination. It really, really hurts me to say this. I've worked in Ukraine with, disease response, more so measles and polio. But it's very, very tough to convince people to get the jab. And the messaging of the government has been terrible. And I think also they did not learn the lessons of the past. We did very, very detailed studies at the time saying that the vaccines that Ukrainians trust are Western made, Germany, places like that. Chinese vaccines, not very much. So this has led to absolutely soaring infection rates. A lot of, look, it isn't entirely the Ukrainians' fault or the people's fault. A lot of disinformation, misinformation about vaccines has been coming from Russia in this hybrid warfare. So people don't know what to believe. It's a very, very sad state of affairs. So our Ukraine's Western partners really have to step up to the plate and do whatever they can to help out with this. It's not, there's no easy way out, and a lot of deaths, a lot of sickness happening right now. I don't think I know one Ukrainian friend who hasn't been impacted. So,
any other questions? Yes.
I was wondering to what extent you thought that the Western financial system and corporate America could do more to pressure China. That you mentioned about Ukraine and the fact that we would have more over Putin if we took him out of the SWIFT system. But even now, major sports organizations like the NBA aren't willing to pull their the big tournaments and things. It was only the female Chinese tennis player who went missing.
Right.
And that has caused a stir. I mean, don't we have some influence through our money to make China pay, or are we too compromised?
Michael?
Fantastic question. I think shareholders, boards need to become more active, proactive in terms of telling the CEO, the company management, no, we do not want our money to go to China or to Russia or wherever, murderous regimes, to Myanmar, for instance. Because I think governments and diplomats are hemmed in to a certain extent, but companies can really, really make a big difference. And I think that's one of the things, and I've actually put it in the book, is that there was a turning point during COVID-19, not because of COVID-19, but because of a more realization that we can make a difference. So what you're seeing is a lot of big companies saying, you know what, okay, biggest consumer market in the world, let's put that aside because we're not going to agree to China's demands for us to operate there. I think it was Google was a good example. They shut down LinkedIn finally. Sorry, Microsoft shut down LinkedIn. A lot of other companies are doing the same thing. Because more and more you will see, if you're a Western company operating in China, is you're going to be really having to play by the rules. One more quick point on that. A lot of companies are trumpeting that they're committed to ESG, right, it's called, and impact investing is where we're going to put our money is going to have a positive social impact. So again, it's a good trend, but I think as the Financial Times reported recently, a lot of companies are putting out annual reports with very fluffy stuff about how they're doing ESG investing and all this, but they're not really making that much of a difference. So really we have the power as consumers to choose to walk away too by what we buy and also by what we post on social media. So don't be silent about this.
Yeah, I was going to add that actually it's not so much just the companies, is it? It's us as those companies' clients, whether we're consumers or not. I don't know if you know, recently there's a big campaign to stop Justin Bieber from having a concert in Saudi Arabia in light of, things like the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, a colleague of ours, a journalist colleague of ours. Anyone else? Any other questions? Gentleman at the back, then gentleman at the front. If you do want to introduce yourself and say where you're from, feel free. If you don't.
So my name is Mukal. I studied Chinese politics, specifically and economics at the university. So I wanted to ask, because what we did, we did the journal, Harvard Journal, and we looked at how the Chinese are silencing on social media and everything the posts that are crossing a particular line. So they even silence not only the poster regarding coronavirus and everything, but they also silence stuff about Pikachu gathering and stuff like that.
Sorry, about
Pikachu gathering, so like Pokemon gathering or anything. So when basically the critical mass of people past a certain point, when they're massing tweets, or they don't have tweets but they have WeChat and everything, when past a certain point, they just ban it.
Yeah.
And what happens, I just wanted to ask specifically regarding the sophisticated tools that they're using. So one of the problems where Soviet Union collapsed was related to that they actually didn't study that human psychology to that level. They didn't have they were banning even the scientists who were doing that.
Yeah.
China actually learned the lesson, and they are improving the ways how they can manipulate the people. You already talked about the social credit system and everything. It feels like they're taking control in every single aspect of the person. So it means that they actually, their control is 1984 pretty much.
Sorry, do you have a question?
Yes. So in the end, what Chinese people have to do in this case? How to get away from the sophisticated tools of control of mass.
Yeah, well, I don't even know if they know how to get away from it, but you are seeing those who can migrating. Come to Vancouver, you'll see a lot of Chinese people there. I think China is our biggest immigration source country at the moment, believe it or not. It used to be Hong Kong, but now that's been absorbed by China. Send your kids abroad to school, settle them there. I think that's the problem there, of course, is that if you're known to be critical of the regime or even suspected to be, you will not be able to leave the country and go study abroad. You will be seen as a liability. I wanted to put out one more interesting thing there, and I have to be honest with you, I learned this because I edit op-eds. I didn't actually research this, but this is someone who's an expert in the area. Is one of the things China is doing very kind of subversively right now is gaining control of the narrative about China in the West, especially Hollywood. They're putting tons and tons of money into Hollywood to influence the narrative. If there are any films whatsoever that are critical of China, even a hint, they will not be seen on millions of screens in China. So I'm also seeing this, I can't prove it, but I have my suspicions. In, for example, expatriate forums on Facebook. You post something, and then you'll see really weird, critical, or snarky comments about what you've posted from the moderator of the group, which has thousands of followers. This is happening more and more. And on the Chinese social media platforms, like you said, a lot of control, but a lot of influencing of the stories. So they're masters at this. I think what the Russians are doing right now is very interesting, reminds me of the China playbook again, is moving towards creating their own internet ecosystem. So they're no longer going to be reliant on the West for provision of connections. The silencing of journalists, the disappearance of people who are active on social media, the expulsions of foreign journalists is getting worse. The pressure on locally hired staff who are working at foreign embassies in in Russia, but also in China. So there are a mix of things happening that we have to look at very carefully, but yeah, the control is pretty complete, I have to say.
Yeah, and as you pointed out, it's really probably only the wealthy and privileged
Correct.
who can go abroad, who can send their children abroad, who are able to escape. So if you're poor and you don't have any wealth to speak of, you're stuck. There was a question here at the front.
Just coming back on deployment of embassy staff to Ukraine by the US, can you elaborate on your thought process on the blockage of Senator Cruz?
Yeah, well, of course, he's a Republican, and he's ostensibly doing this because he doesn't think the Democrats are tough enough on Russia and on China. So his intentions may be good. I don't really blame him. I blame more of the system that one individual on the Senate floor can block so many nominations. Because what happens, the nomination comes down the chute. It has to be unanimous vote, and it only takes one person for it to go back to a very laborious process of approval. But I think the other day there was a voice vote taken that the president's nominee for NATO, I believe, was approved. So that was a good one. But there are other key capitals, for example, Kiev, that need to be approved. This, I think, adds to the cynicism about US foreign policy. The other thing I didn't mention here is that in my travels to various foreign capitals, recently in Riga, a big part of the discussion was on the reliability of the United States as a partner. They're not too pleased at the moment, especially after the chaotic and sudden withdrawal from Afghanistan. Because if they can move in that regard and leaves millions of people so vulnerable, what will happen when push comes to shove in Ukraine? I got the feeling when Zelensky met recently with President Biden that Ukraine pretty much got the feeling that it was thrown under the bus and they have to act alone. But we are also seeing a little bit of drift of Kiev closer to Beijing, despite what I said, the thing about the vaccines and the pressure there. Zelensky, a few weeks ago, had his first phone call with Xi Jinping, and after he hung up the phone, he said, China is our greatest economic partner. And I was in Kiev at the time, and I asked the head of Naftogaz, what the heck is going on with this? And he goes, well, yeah, you know, we need to apply some pressure to the United States to do things like provide us with more heavy weaponry, more training, things like that. So very interesting geopolitics going on, but I think the general impression among folks who go to a lot of these security conferences is that the Biden administration doesn't have a well-articulated position on things like foreign policy in Asia Pacific, also when it comes to Russia. And also internally, you're seeing a lot of battles when it comes to Ukraine policy between the National Security Council and the State Department. Two very different divergent approaches in how to treat Ukraine. That kind of ambiguity, again, is something that Putin likes to exploit. And we don't have time right now to, wring our hands or, what do we do next? They're very good, as I said, at striking when is least expected and when there's disorganization.
Thank you. At the back there.
Just following up on that, sorry, my name's David and I live walking distance up that way. The reason I'm here tonight is I'm just back from my first visit to Ukraine.
Ah, well done.
In fact, I was in Chornobyl, as they call it.
Correct, Chornobyl.
Last Thursday. And I came back very impressed with the little bit of the country that I saw, particularly in and around Kiev. Very impressed with all the young people that I engaged with. And I went last Friday to the Military Museum in Kiev and came back with an even stronger distaste for Vlad the Bad than I went with. Picking up on your point about the EU and to a lesser extent NATO being reluctant to permit admission because of provocation. Well, if the man's more or less invaded twice in the last 7 years and he's about to do it in a bigger way for the third time, how much more provocation can there be?
Yeah.
Why don't the Europeans, why don't the West bite the bullet on this? How much more have they got to lose?
Well, I don't know if I can say this as a foreigner or visitor to the United Kingdom, but I think Boris Johnson said something very rare, something intelligent the other day, where he said, he called a spade. He said, are we going to allow them to invade, or are we going to, in return for energy security? No, we shouldn't. And I think that's kind of the other thing that is going on in the background. Can't emphasize enough how the Kremlin are masters at exploiting weaknesses, but it so happens that right now that we have an energy problem in the European Union. There's not enough gas. Winter is here. Stocks are low. Prices are going up. Russia is in a very enviable position because they have another pipeline, Nord Stream 2, about to come online. And of course, this will solve a lot of the gas problems. The United States, of course, can say, oh, we're going to ship more liquefied natural gas to the EU, but it's cumbersome, it's heavy, it takes time, you have to process it when it arrives. With the pipeline, you can almost put it to work right away, it's beautiful. The other thing about Nord Stream, of course, is it will provide tons and tons of more cash for the regime in the Kremlin at a time when they're hurting because of sanctions. It's a very interesting state of affairs, but one which the Kremlin seems to have the upper hand in terms of a number of things, but especially in terms of energy.
Back again. Sorry, first of all, anyone else with any other questions? Because we've already had one from you. At the back.
Also nice to see you. Thank you very much for organizing these events, all the insights. I'm a journalist, but I'm here not as a journalist, so I'm just asking from the back. Well, basically, Ukraine found itself in a very vulnerable situation for many times in its history, right? Chernobyl, you mentioned, you draw amazing parallels with COVID pandemic. Now we know about Russian troops build up in their borders, which West seems to be concerned about. In your opinion, how do you think, are there any lessons which Ukrainian government could learn from those situations? And are there any particular tips, obviously not telling the Ukrainian government what to do, but maybe there are some particular lessons which they could learn from those situations, which could help them to protect their citizens now? And the other question, if possible, from your feelings, how loud and how real is that discussion in the West countries currently? You mentioned obviously Mr. Biden, but how real that discussion is to actually protect Ukraine in this situation, considering the Nord Stream 2 and
I've got only a few more minutes, so just 2 more questions. So
Okay.
brief answers.
Sure. So giving tips to the Ukrainian government based on what we've learned from Chernobyl and COVID-19 pandemic, well, whatever president comes in to run Ukraine, I pity him or her in a sense, because you have the cards stacked up against you. You don't have only opponents from outside your borders, you have quite a few opponents from inside your borders. I'm talking about, for example, the oligarchs who are fabulously rich in a country that is pretty poor, one of the poorest countries in Europe, and yet they are allowed to operate many times with abandon, but oftentimes they sabotage parts of the economy that where they feel they've been wronged or things like that. And that's happening right now as we speak in the renewable energy sector of Ukraine, whereas one oligarch who thinks he's been treated the wrong way has manipulated things. Zelensky came in as a breath of fresh air. We expected a lot of change. A lot of people, I think, actually thought they were actually voting for the guy on TV, not the guy actually running. On TV, he achieved miraculous things. But he's having a very tough time right now, and I don't know if he'll be in a position to become re-elected. But it's really a pity that he did not. Well, let me put it to you this way. He came in with a historic majority in terms of votes, but also in parliament. So I think he had a lot of latitude to do things very quickly. And one of the things he should have done is fired most of the corrupt judges who control so much of Ukraine. It took him a long time to get rid of his top law enforcement official. So, but this wasn't done, and I think he's paying the price for that right now.
So top 3 things. Ukrainian
So top 3 things. I think number 1 is to what they're doing right now, raising the alarm bell, traveling to capitals nonstop, meeting with top officials in the Senate and Capitol Hill and so on, Ottawa, and telling them this is what's happening in our country right now. Number 2, I think, is that when you're on the precipice of possible Russian aggression, you don't need a pandemic raging on your doorstep. That really, really drains away a lot of resources. It puts people out of action in more ways than one. It's not the thing to have happening. And sorry to say, they could have dealt with this much, much more quicker. And then thirdly, I want to give a shout out to the Ukrainian Institute in my answer. My third point is that Ukraine really needs to internationalize And what I mean by that is when there are problems like what is happening right now, is to make friends with different communities. And it's so refreshing to see such representation here today. But make sure that they know the narrative, and that when it comes to that vote in the OSCE Council or on the floor of the UN Security Council, that you will have the votes there, because people know your story, they trust you, and they like you. One more quick thing is Ukraine needs to get much, much more of its own people into not top, but even mid-level UN positions. I remember very quickly when I was global spokesperson for UNICEF, I was doing twice a week briefings at the Palais des Nations in Geneva. I could pick and choose what disasters or what conflicts or whatever I wanted to talk about to a worldwide press. So that's why we need certain people in those positions. I hope that kind of answered.
That's probably good advice for any country, really,
exactly.
Isn't it? We have time for one last question, and I am taking it. There will be a reception afterwards, so you can ask Michael then, if that's okay.
Explain the tagline, though, on his book.
The
tagline from
just quickly on that. It's a very controversial tagline, and sometimes when I'm doing interviews about the book on TV, they get it wrong. They how tech went from good to bad. But of course, there are many aspects of technology that are bad, and they are documented in the book about, for example, how little is being done to control social media and smartphone addiction. But at the same time, a lot of this technology helped us to connect with loved ones, help us to work from home, access telehealth, shopping, things like that. So what I say in the book is that particular technology trends that came out of Silicon Valley mostly were catapulted 10 years ahead because of COVID. It was ready to come out of the box and be used. So, but trust me, there are some tech titans in the book that get a very good thrashing.
That was effectively what my question was going to be. So, but what I wanted to ask specifically was that where do you draw the line? Because when you have mass surveillance like you have in China, I mean, people in this country as well are of course fighting against an ID card or a COVID vaccination passport. Where do you draw the line? Because it can work, right? It worked for China in terms of controlling the population for lockdown, but it also helps China control its people and make them fearful of even speaking out.
Well, where do you draw the line 2 minutes? I think we're at that point where you either get regulated or you don't. So I think Europe has the gold standard in terms of taking the whip out and whipping the tech giants into shape with the GDPR regulations, which are pretty strict, which I think the United States should adopt. So regulation is needed. They're not going to do it by themselves. I think that was very, very clear with the reaction of Mr. Zuckerberg to the recent scandals with Facebook. And I think, again, I'll repeat what I said earlier, I think you have to walk with your feet. When you don't see, when you're tired of being monitored all the time, you say something in a conversation about, I don't know, going to Gibraltar, and the next day you're getting tourism ads for Gibraltar. There's a good reason for that, is because the AI is very busy at work in the background, and that's an invasion of privacy, my friends. So, talking to your legislators and getting them to move on certain proposed legislation to control these guys. But a lot of this technology that China and Russia are using right now did come from Silicon Valley. They are masters at stealing things and making it much, much more powerful. So I think those are. Can I just thank a couple of people as well?
You can, and then I'm actually going to hand over to Alessia, who will wrap up.
All right, and again, thanks to the Ukrainian Institute, to Saima, our wonderful host, of course the Cathedral and Bishop Ken for having us, also as guests. My editorial assistant, Priti Valley, thank you very much for always being there to support. Giovanni, Maria Ramonti for the wines, Gardabani Wines and Gardabani Group, Ascanelli Wines, Nister Restaurant, and David Skripchaiko, who is supporting the food tonight. So, and thank you, of course, all of you for coming. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.